At this moment, the tree tribe followed you to the open space outside the cave. The group of people were immediately stunned by the scene in front of them. Here, there were beautiful jars and pots placed all over the ground. These were things they had never seen before, making them feel embarrassed to take out their wooden bowls. There were countless fish placed at the entrance of the cave, and there was also a porcupine with more than a dozen holes stabbed all over its body. It seemed to weigh more than 1,000 caddies. It seemed that the hunting team could already use the spears flexibly, which made you very gratified. The big tree had a general understanding of the strength of the Han tribe and finally completely believed that they really didn't have to go hungry in this tribe. The children were standing on a grassy hill nearby, confronting the newly arrived four-legged beasts. Those were the grasses they had pulled out these days. Judging from the size of the haystack, it should be enough for the blue horse and these two dinotheriums to eat for a winter. When Li Lin left, he arranged for them to clean up the open space outside the cave, and the children did a great job. On the open space, except for some newly grown grass, there were no plants like bushes anymore. You hurriedly told everyone that these four-legged beasts were domesticated by yourself and could help everyone with work in the future. Xiao Tzu listened to you carefully on the side and did the translation one by one. Immediately, you happily rewarded each of them with 2 rabbit skins, and the children immediately went joyfully to find their mothers to make clothes. Not far away, on an open space, a large pile of red bricks had been piled up. The lame man reported to you that he could fire a kiln every day, and he also made a tool for the children. As he spoke, he proudly took it out for you to see. When you saw the tool the lame man took out, you were directly shocked. It was actually a simple wooden rake. This guy even had the potential to be an inventor. You praised the lame man a few words, and then told him that he didn't need to fire bricks tomorrow. Instead, he should fire another batch of pottery for the newly arrived tribesmen to use. When it came to pottery, the elder beside him said he also had something to say. A few days ago, the bald-headed tribe in the west came to trade for pottery again. This time they paid a lot of food, which was enough for the Han tribe to eat for a long time. After inspecting all the work, you made arrangements for the animals brought back this time. The rabbits were arranged in a corner of the cave. A pen was built with some stones and yellow mud, and they were let stay here for the winter for the time being. Among the more than 30 rabbits, 3 rabbits were pregnant. Soon after being put into the rabbit pen, they began to bite their own fur to make nests. Although the other rabbits were only 1 or 2 months old, they were already as big as honeydews. By the beginning of next spring, they would become new breeding machines. The baby Dinotherium didn't need to be taken care of, it just couldn't be driven away beside that haystack. The blue horses were all tied to a tree not far from the cave entrance. Tomorrow, someone would be arranged to build a thatched shed for them. After finishing these, the dinner was almost ready. Before the meal, you specially held a welcoming ceremony. The people of the original tree tribe were not resistant to tying their hair. Instead, they thought that tying their hair indeed made them look more energetic and much better looking than with their hair disheveled. Today, a giant pig was hunted, so there was naturally no shortage of pig blood for dinner. Together with wild vegetables, several large pots were stewed. There were also the pheasants you shot today, made into a pot of chestnut, stewed chicken. There were more than a dozen fresh grilled fish, and each person got a sweet and sour fruit. A sumptuous dinner instantly shortened the distance between the old and new tribesmen. Everyone talked and laughed, and ate happily. After the meal, you asked the old people in the tribe to help the new comers make leather boots and let the new comers learn to do it together. And you were holding a burnt wooden stick, thinking and writing and drawing on the rock wall of the cave. On the rock wall, there was a sketch of the terrain outside the cave, with the cave, a small river, a jungle, and some things that didn't originally exist. At this moment, you were thinking about how to plan the open space in front of the cave. This piece of land was nearly 600 mu. If all of it was planted with rice, I'm afraid the people of the whole tribe couldn't finish eating it even if they ate until they died. Of course, it was impossible to plant all of it with rice. You know, this whole area was dry land now, and rice had to be planted in paddy fields. Just transforming these dry lands into paddy fields was a huge project. Then there was the housing problem. With the newly joined and the tribesmen born during this period, the population of the Han tribe had reached 97. The current cave was gradually unable to meet the living conditions, so houses would have to be built on this land in the future. Residential areas, paddy fields, vegetable areas, breeding farms, warehouses, grasslands, bronze smelting areas, and wood processing plants. So many facilities had to be placed on this land, and it must be carefully planned. The first problem to be solved was the transformation of paddy fields. The simple plan was to build a square small town in the middle of the open space, and put the residential area, breeding farm, warehouse, metal smelting area, and wood processing plant all in this small town. The whole town was expected to provide living conditions for at least 5,000 people, and the maximum capacity could accommodate 8,000 people to live together. It could be completed in installments over a few years. Around this small town with a side length of 400 meters, dig a moat. The soil dug out could be used together with the adobe bricks to build the city wall, which could prevent attacks from some giant beasts and outsiders. Then, taking the moat as the center, dig an artificial river and divert the small river about 8 or 9 meters wide in the east. Dig a few return channels to make the water in the moat flow back into the small river, thus forming a huge water network. Dig some small canals along this water network, and then the whole plot of land could be irrigated. The width of the moat and the artificial river was preset to be 4 meters. The small river in the east was 8 or 9 meters wide. The water flow rate would increase by more than double because the artificial river was narrow while the water flow volume remained the same. This would facilitate the installation of some water conservancy facilities like water wheels. The specific plan was to take the cave as the center line, and select a site for the small town by taking 200 meters on each side. In order not to delay the spring plowing next year, the first phase project was to dig through the waterway from the small river to the moat. After careful calculation, it was about 700 meters. The excavated earth was directly fired into bricks to prepare for the subsequent construction. The second phase project was the excavation of the moat. However, this matter was not urgent. Anyway, the cave could still accommodate people for now. The third phase was to ram the city wall. The city wall was preset to be a trapezoid with a bottom width of 4 meters, a top width of 2 meters, and a height of 5 meters. There were 4 city gates, one on each side, coupled with the 4-meter wide moat outside. No one could break in this era. The fourth phase project was the 700-meter long return river. The soil dug out could be fired into small bricks to build houses and various facilities in the city. The whole project was expected to be completed within 3 years at the slowest. Otherwise, you were afraid that there would be no room for people to live in the cave by then. The next morning, after all the tribesmen came out, you began to arrange work. There were a lot of things to do today, and the work of gathering food was completely stopped. The newly arrived tribesmen hadn't been settled yet, so the lame man was arranged to continue firing pottery. The children continued to cut grass, and according to your demonstration, they had to bundle the grass for easy storage and transportation. Dezue, Hozi, Demao, and Ermao went to the back mountain to cut back all the saplings of the man-eating tree and make them into spears. The women were divided into 2 teams. The larger team went to the valley where you had been to gather sisal. Mu Tun led 6 blue horses, carrying several large baskets to be responsible for transportation. The other smaller gathering team went to the jungle to scrape the bark of the ash tree. There was the secretion of white wax insects on it, which was an excellent material for making wax. You were going to use the insect wax to make molds for casting bronze. The remaining men were all arranged by you to cut trees. First, cut some tree trunks about as thick as a leg for building. All the branches were split into firewood, which you wanted to make into charcoal. The more charcoal there was, the better for copper smelting. The transportation problem was still left to the blue horses. If they couldn't pull it, they could ask the baby Deinotherium for help. The tribesmen didn't understand these arrangements. They thought that food should be stored in autumn. But you told them that the food stored now was enough to last until the beginning of next spring. Especially the fish. Many of the fish caught during this period had fish roe in their bellies. If fishing continued like this, the number of fish in this river would surely be affected. So it was necessary to give these fish some time to rest and recuperate. After all the tribesmen went out to work, you also got busy. First, you made some charcoal from the existing wood. Then you used the kaolin and snow, like soil you brought back to make several crucibles and spoons for purification and alloy making. You also made square molds with the mixed refractory clay, so that you could cast copper plates and tin plates like chocolate bars. Then, according to needs, adjust the ratio of copper and tin to make tools for different purposes. It was not until the charcoal and molds were made that you started to make the smelting furnace. Ordinary clay, mixed with some pottery fragments and a little chopped grass, was kneaded into mud and piled into a cylindrical clay furnace with a diameter of more than 40 centimeters. You made 4 such furnaces. Firing them together would save a lot of time. Next, you made several simple bellows with python skins. The lame man didn't know what you were up to, but he was quite looking forward to what new thing the chief would come up with this time. When all your preparations were done, the world's first set of the most primitive smelting equipment was completed. All that was left was to wait for the charcoal to be burned and the furnaces to dry, and then work could start. Dezue, Hozi and the others worked for a whole day and brought back several hundred tree trunks that could be made into spears. But those adult tree cutters had a tough time. After a whole day of hard work, they managed to cut down less than 10 fir trees, and 3 stone axes for cutting trees were broken. But you told them mercilessly that they had to continue tomorrow. But whoever did a good job would get new equipment. Everyone was a bit confused. The stone axe was already the best tool they had ever seen. What could be better than a stone axe? They were a little expectant. After dinner, everyone started their post-dinner entertainment. And you started to boil wax by the fireplace. After it solidified, you cut it into the shapes of different tools with a bone knife. Then, you wrapped these wax models tightly with clay, leaving only a small opening. After the clay was completely dry, you heated it over the fire and poured out the melted wax inside. In this way, you could get a hollow clay column. The thin layer of wax remaining on the inner wall of the casting mold would make it easier to demold after casting. Although it was a bit troublesome, it was more precise and wouldn't waste materials. The poured-out wax liquid could also solidify into large pieces and be reused. Early the next morning, the tribesmen led the blue horses away. After your unremitting efforts to instill the idea, they finally understood that wild beasts could not only be eaten but also help humans with work. Dezue and the other 4 people stayed behind. Their task today was to operate the bellows for you. The lame man's pottery was fired yesterday, and today he specifically came to assist you. The lame man was very smart, so you planned to teach him the method of copper smelting. It was impossible for you to do this kind of work alone in the future. It would be better to find an apprentice. At this time, the 4 furnaces were dry, and 2 of them were lit together. Demao and Ermao pressed the bellows, while Dezue and Hozi loaded charcoal and crushed copper ore. Under the action of the bellows, the flame shot up high from the furnace mouth. Before long, the ore in the furnace began to melt slowly. The copper liquid flowed down through the gaps to the bottom of the furnace, gathered together, and turned into a lump of copper mixed with slag. The tin ore was also being smelted beside it, and it melted even faster. It melted in just a few minutes under the fierce fire. 2 pieces of metal with a lot of impurities were picked out from the ashes at the bottom of the furnace, and then the operation was repeated. After about 3 or 4 hours, a pile of impure metal lumps was finally accumulated. The remaining 2 furnaces were lit. After the temperature rose, the crude copper and impure tin were placed in 2 crucibles respectively. When the copper and tin were melted into liquid, the impurities on the surface were skimmed off with a clay spoon. Then, with a pre-prepared clay stick, the pure copper liquid was scooped out and poured into a grid-shaped clay mold to cool down. The same operation was done for the tin liquid. The lame man and the 4 little friends were watching the metal liquid slowly solidify. They didn't understand the principle, so they were very surprised. They waited until the copper plates and tin plates were no longer tangsho. Then they couldn't wait to pour out the metal plates. It was noon at this time, and the metal plates reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight. Everyone stared at the metal plates with their mouths wide open. They had never seen anything so beautiful and shiny. Their expressions were no less obsessed than modern people seeing gold bricks. Even Chu Bing, who was playing, was attracted. He touched this and looked at that, asking, "Chief, what are these?" You rubbed his head and said, "This is called copper, and this is called tin. You stay here and watch. I'll go get something." Chu Bing nodded and whispered the words, "Copper," and "tin," with the lame man and the others. And you carried a pile of tool molds over and immediately started the bronze casting work. The copper and tin blocks were put into a new crucible according to the proportion. After melting into liquid, they were stirred evenly with a clay stick. Then it was time to cast. The first pot was used to cast an axe. The scalding alloy solution was poured into the mold, and a puff of white smoke immediately emerged from the reserved hole in the casting mold. When the temperature dropped slightly, they couldn't wait to smash the casting mold with a stone. In the broken clay pieces, a large axe shining with a pale golden light was lying quietly. The axe was a little bigger than a fighting axe. The work of grinding the blade was left to the lame man. You then started to prepare for the casting of other tools: rulers, panel saws, carving knives, chisels, planes, hand drills, and 4-sided spearheads. When the tribesmen came back in the evening, all the work stopped. The golden, bladed axe was sharpened to a shine, with the handle inserted. The world's first bronze axe was completed. There were also 2 panel saws with wooden handles, one for single-person use and one for double-person use. When Big Tree and the others saw the glittering big axe, they immediately gathered around. What a beautiful axe! Their eyes were almost glued to it. And this? You smiled and took out a long spear with a white shaft and a pointed head. The tribesmen stared in amazement. Is this still a spear? It's so beautiful. Especially Shoya and Duer. When they saw this pointed, headlong spear, they almost drooled. "Chief, will there be some for us?" The tribesmen couldn't wait to ask. You smiled and took out a piece of chalcopyrite and handed it to Big Tree. It's made from this kind of stone, but there's no such stone left now. The people of the Yuan Shu tribe were stunned. They had dug this kind of stone before, but they never thought the weapons made from it were so beautiful. Mu Tun was the most honest and straightforward. "Since there's little, we can go dig more. We know where it is." You nodded, but told them that digging like this was too little. They also had to make some things first. After this winter, they could dig back a lot, and then everyone could have a long spear like this. The tribesmen calmed down. What the chief said was believable. Since you said everyone would have one, there surely would be. Then, you took them to the cut, downwood and taught them how to use the panel saw and hand saw. The two-person panel saw was placed at the end of the log and pulled back and forth. Before long, a circular wooden slice was cut off. The single hand saw was used to clean the branches. A side branch as thick as a wrist was cut off in less than 1 minute. The 1 meter long big axe was also very handy. One could use all one's strength when swinging it. If used by a strong man in the Han tribe, a tree as thick as a thigh could be cut down with just a few strokes. After everyone learned how to use these tools, you told them to go have dinner and rest. After dinner, the tribesmen gathered together to listen to the lame man talk about copper smelting. And you started to formulate various measurement units. Only with measurement units could civilization develop slowly in the future. All the sisal had been collected now, and the women were now concentrating on weaving ropes. The children were lying outside the rabbit pen, watching the rabbits giving birth to baby rabbits. The 3 pregnant big rabbits all gave birth, and each litter had 6 or 7. The rabbit group of more than 30 rabbits almost doubled. The lame man had a long time experience in clay kneading. Now he could be competent in carving wax molds for you. The copper shovel at the source could be used for both digging rivers and farming. With the sample you gave, it was no problem for the lame man to copy it. After you finished your work, you now started to study the most crucial thing. You planned to make 2 sizes. The large ones were for the dinotherums, and the small ones were for the blue horses. They would be useful for plowing fields and digging rivers later. The next day, some of the women were twisting hemp ropes, and some were cleaning the ground. You had just drawn an area and asked them to clean it up. Construction would start soon. For the bronze casting work, the lame man and the 4 little friends were enough for now. The 5 of them were constantly casting copper plates and tin plates. Whenever they had questions, they would come to ask. After the women finished cleaning, you led them to start building. The cut-down trees were cut into 4-meter-long sections as columns. 1 column was inserted every 2 meters to form a rectangular circle. 2 horizontal logs were tied in the gaps for fixation. Then, branches were used to weave fences, which were fixed to the wooden fence. Finally, a layer of mud was smeared on it, and it was done. Inside the fence was a wooden shed with a height of 4 meters. It was the little home of the baby dinotherum. After everything was built, the haystack piled outside was all bundled and placed in the circle to prevent it from being damaged by other animals or enemies. The tribesmen of the Han tribe each did their part and were busy in full swing. Little did they know that at this time, the bald head tribe had set their sights on the Han tribe, and a crisis was approaching. During this period, the bald head had been having a headache. As the weather got colder, the mountain spring water that his tribe relied on was about to dry up. By then, they could only fetch water from a small river 3 kilometers away, which would require a large number of containers for water storage. So last time he came to trade with the Han tribe in person, aiming to exchange for more pottery. Unfortunately, he didn't get what he wanted, so he came up with the idea of seizing by force. In the bald head's opinion, there were less than 10 adult men in the Han tribe, while his tribe had dozens of people. Moreover, after leaving the Han tribe last time, he made his own spear with a stone tip. He thought it should be no problem to defeat them and rob their pottery and food. That morning, the bald head led all the adult men in the tribe, each with several spears, and marched towards the Han tribe in a mighty manner. They were going to defeat the hunting team of the Han tribe in one fell swoop, and then loot their living quarters. At this time, in the coniferous forest on the ridge, Big Tree, Shoya and the others were still cutting trees. They worked very fast today. With 3 big axes and 2 long saws, they could get a clean log in basically half an hour. And this was just the speed of one group. The tree cutting team had a total of 10 people, divided into 3 groups. So basically, every half an hour, 3 trees could be felled simultaneously. The remaining person was Mu Tun, who was in charge of transportation. Now he was leading the blue horses to graze near the tree cutting team. Just then, a group of people suddenly ran from the mountain across the valley, each holding a spear. Mu Tun immediately shouted towards the ridge, and then quickly pulled the blue horses and ran back. Hearing the shout, everyone immediately stopped what they were doing, picked up their weapons, and prepared for battle. Mu Tun led 6 blue horses and fled for their lives, while the bald head and his men chased closely behind. When they reached the ridge, accompanied by several whistling sounds of breaking wind, the last 2 blue horses were shot by spears. They let out a shrill cry and fell to the ground. The other 4 horses tied to them were still running wildly, dragging the corpses of their 2 companions all the way towards the grassy hill of the Han tribe. Seeing this, the people of the Han tribe hiding behind the trees took out stone axes from behind their waists and threw them out. With several whistling sounds, 3 people on the enemy side immediately fell to the ground and couldn't get up, and 2 others were injured. Only 10 people were still moving forward. This was unexpected for the bald head. He thought that with so many people coming, the other side should be scared and run away, but they actually dared to counter-attack. The bald head was completely enraged. He immediately gave the order to throw spears again. But as soon as the 10 throwing spears flew out, Big Tree and the others hid behind the trees again. All the spears stuck straight into the ground. Seeing this, Do-Air and the others flashed out from behind the trees again, and 9 white, shafted spears were thrown out at the same time. 4 more people in the bald head's tribe fell down instantly. Fortunately, the others hid behind the trees in time. Do-Air and the others also hid behind the trees again, waiting for the enemy's next attack, but they didn't hear any sound for a long time. They didn't know that the bald head was already scared out of his wits at this time. The enemy in front of him was too terrifying. Moreover, he found that there were more people in the Han tribe than he had expected, and now there were only 8 people left on his side, 2 of whom were wounded. It was impossible to continue fighting. He immediately led the remaining people to flee towards the karst cave. At the same time, Xiaozu was pulling you in front of the 2 Deinotheriums to name them. The slightly larger one was named Huishan, and the slightly smaller one was named Robao. Just as you were about to say something, Huishan suddenly raised its head and roared towards the stream. Caught off guard, Xiaozu was startled. You immediately looked towards the stream along the direction. You saw 4 blue horses dragging the corpses of 2 companions. Running towards you, there were several spears stuck in the corpses of the 2 blue horses. But there was no sign of the logging team following behind. You were shocked. You quickly told all the tribesmen to hide in the cave and not come out until you came back. After making all the arrangements, you took the bow and arrow and the golden-headed long spear, and rode Huishan towards the west. Robao immediately followed. Following the bloodstains of the blue horses on the ground, Huishan carried you and galloped. Before long, you entered the jungle. A group of people suddenly appeared in front of you. They were exactly Big Tree and the others. You were stunned. What's going on? Everyone is here, and no one seems to be injured. Shoya immediately led the hunting team to your side and told you everything that had happened just now. After hearing his account, you were a bit puzzled. Why did the bald head and his men attack your tribe? But no matter what the reason was, as long as they dared to harm your tribesmen, they had to pay the price, even if it was just the blue horses that were killed. Immediately, you waved your long spear and led several people from the tree cutting team to the bald head tribe. It was around 2 p.m. when you finally arrived at the bald head tribe. But there was not a single person on the open space in front of the karst cave, and the cave entrance was blocked by a huge boulder. However, there was still a big gap. Several pairs of eyes were secretly looking out, and the bald head was one of them. He was most afraid that the other side would come for revenge. Unexpectedly, what he feared came true. The other side really came. And it was such an imposing lineup. The leader held a golden-headed long spear that shone brightly, and was riding a long-nosed giant beast taller than a person. At this time, the bald head regretted it extremely. If he had known that the other side was so powerful, he wouldn't have bothered. You also noticed the pairs of eyes peeking out from the karst cave. You immediately took off the longbow on your back, drew the bow, and nocked an arrow. The next moment, a scream was heard. The bald head was shot through the eye by an arrow, and the arrowhead came out from the back of his head. Dolly, sure too, Liuji, you go and push the stone away. You pointed at the huge boulder at the entrance of the karst cave and gave orders to the 3. They immediately stepped forward to push the boulder, but even with the 3 of them exerting force together, they didn't move it much. Instead, it was slowly pushed back. Damn it, do you think you're safe by blocking the door? You walked to the gap,